and welcome back to my channel. So today I want to make another blouse. I know I just made one, but there's another style of blouse that I've been really wanting to make. And I think it would look really good with this fabric right here, which is also one I got from my trip to Japan. I really hope it turns out good, and please make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to that channel. And let's get started. To make the pattern, I used a top I already had with a similar shape to what I wanted my blouse to have. I folded it in half and traced the front and back. Since I wanted it to button up, I added some extra length to the front edge of the front piece. But the back piece would be cut on the fold, so I just left it as it was. And besides that, all I changed was the length because the top I traced was a little long for my liking. And I made sure not to forget to add in the seam allowance. There were some parts where I wanted to make French seams, so for those places I made a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, but besides that I just added 1 centimeter to all sides. And to make the collar pattern, I put the necklines of the front and back pieces together, folding away the shoulder seam allowances. Then I traced that curve and marked 8 centimeters from the curve, which is how wide I wanted the collar to be. Then again, I added in seam allowance and marked which side would be cut on the fold before cutting that out as well. For the sleeves, I had this pattern that I got a while back and I've actually never used it, but it was the kind of sleeve I wanted, so I thought, why not, I might as well use it. But if you want to make this as well, if you cut out the same general shapes as these, it should work just fine. As I got to work cutting out the fabric, I tried really hard to match up the lines and to make sure that everything was perfectly on grain, because with plaid fabrics, if the pattern is slanted, it can look a little weird, especially for the front and back pieces. I cut out 2 collar pieces, 2 front pieces, 2 sleeve ruffle pieces, 2 sleeve band pieces, 1 back piece, and 2 sleeve pieces. To begin sewing, I put together the shoulder and side seams and sewed that up. This fabric was a frayer, so I used French seams. I pretty much use it for all my projects, but in case you don't know, that's when you sew the fabric wrong size together before cutting down the seam allowance and sewing them right size together so that the raw edge is encased, leaving a nice finished edge. And as I sew everything together, I am matching the lines on the fabric as much as I can. I'm really interested to know what other kinds of videos you want to see from me, because I'm not sure that they always align with the kind of videos I want to make. I'm wondering if you guys would be interested in seeing me recreate looks from movies or from famous people. If you are, let me know in the comments down below. Once the shoulder and side seams are put together, it should look like this, and then I went on to making the collar. The collar is really simple to make. I just put them right size together and sewed all around, leaving the smaller curve open. I did contemplate adding in a ruffle to this collar, but since I was already adding a ruffle to the sleeve, I didn't want there to be too much going on, so I decided to omit it. Which I'm glad I did, because it turned out really cute without the ruffle. Once trimming down the seams, I turned it right side out and ironed it down nice and flat. This is how it looks, and now it can be attached to the body. I'm just going to pin it to the right side of the back piece, starting with aligning the back center and working my way towards the front. It shouldn't make it all the way to the front. There should be a little piece left sticking out, which you will turn over and pin on the collar. You're going to sew over that so it can help create the button panel later on. As you can see, when you flip this over, it creates a nice edge where we can put our buttons. Though when you do this, you want to leave a little more sticking out instead of it being flush with the collar like I have here. I did have to go back and redo this so more fabric was sticking out so that I could actually add buttons to it. And to finish this raw edge of the collar, I took a strip of fabric that I just showed you and pinned it on top of the collar on the stitching we just made to attach the collar to the top. I sewed over the previous line of stitching as much as I could before folding over the raw edge of the other side of the strip of fabric and sewing it down to encase the raw edge. I basically just folded over the strip of fabric under the seam allowance, and this side of stitching will end up being on the actual body pieces. And in case anyone is interested, I made the seam allowances on the shoulders and sides go towards the back. And this completes the collar. I am going to go on to making the button panel. To do this, I just folded over the front, which has already been started when we made the collar, so I just worked my way all the way down. And I made this 2 centimeters wide, but it depends on how big you want your buttons to be. So if you want bigger buttons, then just make this wider, and if you want smaller buttons, you can make it smaller, but I do think 2 centimeters is probably the smallest you want to go, unless you're going to have like really tiny buttons. And yeah, it is something you're going to have to adjust beforehand when you're cutting out the pattern. But either way, you do want to make the lines match the front pieces, unlike what I am doing. You can see how when I'm folding it over, the lines are slanted, and it will just make it look that much nicer if you take the time to actually make it line up. I wasn't really thinking about it enough when I was making this, but once it was completed, I could really notice it, and I really regretted not taking the time to match it up. When making anything to wear, I always try on multiple times during the making process just to make sure everything is fitting correctly and looking the way I want it to, so I highly recommend you do the same so that you know to fix something before it's too late. And now I could go on to the sleeves. I took the big sleeve pieces and sewed up the seams using a French seam to make it one loop of a sleeve. Then I got my sleeve cuff piece thing and also sewed it up into a loop. No need to use French seams here because the raw edges will be hidden later anyways. And once I sewed it into a loop, I folded it in half and ironed that, and then tucked in each raw edge and ironed that as well so that we can put it onto the sleeve. And in order to do that, I gathered the bottom edge of the sleeves. I put 2 lines of parallel basting stitches along the bottom of the sleeves and pulled on the top thread of each line of stitching to gather the fabric up so it could fit onto the band. You can just use 1 line of basting stitches, but I recommend using 2, one within the seam allowance and one outside of it, to ensure that the place you are going to end up sewing remains nicely gathered. So you can see here how I'm pulling on the threads until the circumference of the sleeve opening matches the cuff. And this is the cuff folded and ironed like I described earlier, and I'm just going to fit it onto the sleeves and top stitch all around. And this is how they looked once both sleeves were done. I really liked how gathered they were. Next, I will do the ruffle that will go on top of the sleeves. I hemmed the longer edge of this ruffle all the way around, and it was quite tricky because it was on such a curve, so it took quite a bit longer than I expected. I attached it onto the main body of the blouse by matching up the center of the ruffle with the shoulder seam and then sewing them right sides together around the arm's eye. I did also sew the two straight sides of the ruffle to the arm's eye as well, so that it looks like the ruffle gradually disappears around the shoulders. I could now add the actual sleeves onto the blouse. I gathered it the same way I gathered the sleeves onto the cuff with two parallel basting stitches. I matched up the center of the sleeve to the shoulder seams of the blouse, and this time I used French seams encasing all the raw edges from the blouse and the ruffle and the sleeve. French seams don't always work the best for sleeves since it is on a curve, but in this case it worked out very nicely. And this is what the sleeves looked like once it was finished. And then I hemmed the bottom just using a basic rolled hem. The last thing to do is add the buttons and buttonholes. I looked through my button stash and I managed to find these really cute heart-shaped buttons, so I went with that. And I used 6 buttons in total. I did the buttonholes using my sewing machine before adding on the buttons by hand. And this is how the top turned out. I think it's so cute, casual enough for everyday wear, but also really pretty. I really like this plaid pattern. I think it nicely suits the design of this blouse. And I'm also wearing a pair of pants that I made myself in this shot. And here I have those pants I made with the blouse I just made, with the bag I made, with the beret I made. So I got to wear all these things that I made, and I was really excited about that. Anyways, thank you so much for sticking to the end, and I would really appreciate it if you gave this video a like and subscribe to our channel and maybe leave a comment down below. And see you next time!